Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kachijian, and today I'm joined by Tony Holler. Tony has been a teacher for 38 years and presently teaches honors chemistry at Plainfield North High School in Plainfield, Illinois. He also has 38 years' experience coaching football, basketball, and track and field. Tony is presently the head track coach and freshman head football coach at Plainfield North. He is a member of the Illinois Track and Field Hall of Fame and has coached multiple teams to state track championships. A coveted author and speaker, Tony is also co-director of the Track Football Consortium. Most people who are familiar with Tony's work recognize him as a highly successful track and field coach, and deservedly so. Coaches are teachers at heart, however, and Tony has also been teaching for almost 4 decades. Tony's varied experiences allow him to recognize patterns in skill development and knowledge acquisition across multiple domains. Many sport coaches and medical providers work under far from optimal logistical, administrative, and financial constraints. It's no different in education. Similarly, performance and medical professionals are often asked to justify their worth to large organizations with metrics that might not tell a meaningful story. Teachers have had to justify their worth to administrators with standardized tests for quite some time now. While large organizations and bureaucratic systems must necessarily cater to the lowest common denominator, it can come at a cost, as Tony so passionately and succinctly articulates. This podcast is brought to you by Resilient Performance Systems. If you enjoy the material here, please check out our website at www.resilientperformance.com and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on future podcast episodes, articles, and upcoming content, including training templates and live and online courses. The sign-up link for the newsletter is in the show notes. Podcast listeners will receive a discount on all paid content by entering the coupon code PODCAST. That's PODCAST in all capital letters. Additionally, please consider writing an iTunes review if you find these podcast conversations informative. They help us continue to attract high-quality guests. Without further delay, here's Tony Holler. Tony, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. So I wanted to begin by asking you, you've been teaching and coaching for almost 4 decades now. So how does teaching chemistry and coaching track and field at the high school level, how are they similar and how are they different?
Well, they're similar because probably in most schools, chemistry and track both suck.
Okay.
The chemistry is not a favorite class of kids, and track is a stepchild in the sports world. Both are considered hard, and the cool thing, though, and the thing I really like about a couple of things I really like about both of them is that your experience is highly dependent on the quality of your teacher or your coach. And anybody that said they loved chemistry in high school, I always follow up with, "I bet you had a great teacher." And they go, "Oh, he was great. And then same thing with track. Most kids don't talk highly of track. But when they do, I bring, "Hey, I bet you had a great coach." He says, "Oh, he's the best coach." So I take that every day as a challenge that I'm going to make something that kids probably wouldn't do unless they were encouraged to do it, and try to get them to actually like it. And the other thing about it is I always tell people that I started as a basketball coach and a biology teacher, and when I look back, this was my destiny, because I'm a person that sees every day in numbers. I don't say it's hot out. I say it's 92 degrees. I don't say we got a long way to go. I say we got 300 miles to go. So everything I see is in numbers. And I don't think there's a more quantified science than chemistry. And I don't think there's more quantified sport than track. So it's both things. I'm ruled by numbers and all that stuff. So I probably was destined to be here.
Okay, and then so you mentioned that track and field and chemistry can be tough sells to people who are between 14 and 18 years of age. So what strategies are you employing in the classroom and on the track to keep these students engaged and to just make the experience contextually meaningful? Because chemistry can be so abstract, right? Like as a 16-year-old, you can't see much application to your real life. And then track and field tends to not be as fun as running around with the ball and playing with the team. There's a lot of kind of inherent suffering and misery in track and field. So again, what do you do to make those things more fun and engaging?
Well, I'm an essentialist, which means that you're constantly thinking about priorities. And seldom do I go into a chemistry class without a clear-cut priority. And I think many teachers go in with too many priorities. Two coaches go into every day with too many priorities. And I like to say they drown in shallow waters. They don't get anywhere. So, if you go in saying, I'm going to get this small thing done in class, I think almost every day in chemistry class, I have more time than I need with the kids. And that's okay because that allows us to spin off in other directions. And that's the same way in track. I talked to a coach the other day that said, he wanted to make sure his sprinters and his distance runners ended practice at the same time. And I said, why? Why would you keep sprinters for 2 hours when they only need 40 minutes? Why? Well, it just seems fair. And so we get into all that mess. But in track, I don't have to stay for 55 minutes. Matter of fact, we seldom do. Our typical practice is 40 to 45 minutes. And we try to get done a couple important things. I live by the motto of small gains. If we have small gains and a happy spirit, I think kids go a long way.
And then how do you use you talked a lot about the record, rank, and publish, especially with your track and field athletes. And essentially, like, you're promoting the team and making these people feel almost like rock stars. Like, they can look up their workouts on social media or on your website. And I think you say that, 1 billion people in China can see what we did today at practice. So can you talk about like what you're doing to promote the sport? Because again, it's not really that easy to sell at the high school level.
Yeah, I started doing that about 20 years when I really became quantified in practice. My program is called Feed the Cats, and that's the whole idea. The sprinters are more cat-like. They're like a different animal than distance runners. That running and sprinting are two different things. So what I started doing 20 years ago was saying, okay, what is it about cats that make them so fast? And obviously it's like fast twitch fibers and explosive musculature and all that kind of thing, and a highly developed nervous system. But one of the things that I've noticed with sprinters is they're highly, highly competitive. And they're not just competitive racing each other. They're competitive when you simply time them and write down their time. And in the early days, I would just rank them and put it up on a bulletin board. And my kids would check that bulletin board every single day. And so I started thinking, man, I'm feeding the cats. I'm feeding their competitive spirit. And I've done the same thing in the classroom where, I put an honor roll on the board and I list the top scores from every test. And I guarantee kids notice that too. So I think record, rank, and publish, I think we've kind of gotten away from that in the classroom because everybody's afraid of liability and, little Johnny may not have done so well on his test. He may go home crying. And I don't think that, we should, tailor our instruction about little Johnny being upset about a low test grade, that we need to promote high test grades. We need to promote improvement. And that's the great thing about when you record, rank, publish, is that kids eventually learn that they may be competing against each other, but really life is really a competition about, against yourself, trying to be the best you can be and trying to score better on your tests and trying to run faster in your 40-yard dash. So, yeah, I'm pretty big on numbers.
Okay, so for the most part, you haven't really had any negative experiences with kids who have been made to feel inadequate because your system is so transparent where everything is being posted. You feel like ultimately these students learn to compete against themselves and not against their teammates who might have just more natural ability?
That's absolutely true. In 20 years of posting things, I guess I've been posting online for about 12, with Twitter and a website and all that. Before that was all just bulletin board. But in those 20 years of just constantly, all types of different practice metrics and all that, constantly posting rankings. Not one time have I ever had a parent or a student asked to have their name taken off. not one time in 20 years. And that really surprises a lot of people. And, some people have told me that the strength of my personality, because I'm kind of outspoken and all those things, that they couldn't get away with what I get away with. But it's true. I mean, I've never had any problems.
All right. So then kids aren't as fragile as maybe we might think that they are, is what you're saying.
I think they're about as fragile as we let them be.
Right.
I really think the kids are very resilient, and that's a great statement you just made. I don't know if I've ever said that before, but I think the more you baby a kid and ask them how they feel about a poor performance, the more they're like, I don't want to do that anymore. And we need to just encourage them to improve.
Right. So you've been very outspoken about the status quo in track and field, but I also know that you've got some pretty strong thoughts on the educational system, which kind of goes hand in hand with the coaching profession. So I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit and just ask you, do you think the curriculums that regulatory boards dictate be taught reflect modern educational priorities?
I just think modern educational priorities are totally screwed up. I think I don't think the people see the problem with education are the experts are not very smart. The problem with education is if you really want to know about education, you go to good teachers. They're in the trenches. They totally know what good education is. The people who rise to the level of experts, and this is some crazy stuff, but are typically bad teachers that start plotting their exit strategy within their first 2 or 3 years of teaching. They know that if they get a master's degree, they'll be making $10,000 more as a teacher. And so they get a master's degree in administration, which does not make them a better teacher, but they make more money. It's a crazy setup we have. Maybe I'm just jealous because I never got my master's. But so they get a master's degree, and by the time they're 30, they're an assistant principal. By the time they're 38, they're a principal, and they're praying that by the time they're 50, they're making $300,000 as a superintendent. The big money is in administration. The further you get away from kids, the more money you make, and so people, it's obvious that people want to do that. And then to rise up the ladder, you have to be a yes man. You have to parrot the ideas of your bosses. And so what happens is the experts take us down the wrong path. And so I would say if somebody said, what is the educational priority in today's school? It is to prepare kids for the next level. And that has obviously a very, very close, mirrors very closely athletics, because in athletics, we're constantly talking about we're trying to get to the next level. And so there's no focus on the present. There's no focus on loving your work, loving your education, loving to read. You love to write. You're curious. In the athletic sense, there's more like a pressure to perform, so you get a scholarship instead of a love of the game. And so we're really missing out on all those things. And so I really think we're misguided. And then curriculum itself is basically to prepare kids to do well on their SAT or ACT. My high school right now, every single kid has to take biology, chemistry, and physics, because somebody read that if you take all three of those sciences, you do better on your standardized tests. So basically everything we do is to get kids into college, and we have tripled the number of kids in college in the last 40 years, but probably 50% of those kids don't even belong in college. They're taking courses that don't matter and graduating with a degree that doesn't matter and living in their parents' basement with $100,000 of debt. So I hate to be so negative about everything, but I know how good it can be in good classrooms when kids are present and they're not constantly thinking about the next level, and teachers are not pressured to teach to tests that don't matter.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because basically you're saying that the goal of high school is to prepare people for additional academic endeavors down the road, which if you're a professional academic or an academic administrator, that's very self-serving because you're keeping people in that system and you're obviously generating more money for universities and probably your colleagues who are at the next level. So, I mean, in an ideal world, and this is obviously like you and I aren't in charge, right? But if you were, if you were, what would be the goal of, what would be the purpose of high school, if not to prepare people for college, which is like, okay, great, you go to college, right? But so what should be the goal then?
Well, the goal should be to debate. My favorite Yeats quote is better to light a fire than to fill a pail. And it's the only quote I have on my desk at school. And my idea would be that we want kids to love to read, which we do a terrible job with because we assign mandatory books that are awful. Kids do not want to read The Grapes of Wrath. They want to read something else. If I was forced to read books, I probably wouldn't read them. But instead, I've read 1,000 books in my life, and probably 998 of those I picked myself. And I chose to read those things. We would teach kids to write, but they would write about things that they wanted to write about. We would teach curiosity. We would have kids doing science instead of memorizing facts about science. I constantly say my chemistry class is a do-it class. And Einstein said that if any type of fact is easily looked up, why are we filling our head with that useless knowledge? In the day of cell phones, which are illegal in my school, you can look up easily an element and its symbol. So why would I ever want them to memorize the elements and their symbols? But that's the type of thing that we do in education, where we test things just because we measure things that are easily measured. We test things that are easy to put into a multiple choice test. The 35 labs that I do in chemistry cannot be tested on a multiple choice test. And so it's almost like we're wasting time doing those labs. But I know we're not wasting our time doing those labs because we are what we do.
Right. So then this is like, I think, one of the fundamental questions in education. How do you as a teacher personally gauge if students are learning? And in doing so, and you're gauging whether your students are learning, is that at odds with, standardized testing and top-down directives? Like, do you have to compromise your process to accommodate some of these top-down directives? How do you kind of strike that balance between giving the students what you think they need and also sort of keeping your job as an educator? Because presumably you're measured or, gauged on your ability to prepare people for these standardized tests.
Yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in those questions. We
got time.
Oh, good. Well, I would like to be able to address them all if I can remember all the things you said. First of all, how do you address that? I go ahead and do those 35 labs, even though I was told last year that I was doing too many because there were other teachers not doing as many, and the school was getting phone calls. Why can't my kid be in Mr. Holler's class? Because they do a lot of fun labs. And so I was told to cut back. And so I just close my door and I don't cut back because the kids are my priority. And I've always been kind of a rebel as a teacher, but I've always been evaluated as an excellent teacher, a superior teacher. So I'm always telling young teachers that if they try too hard to do everything that the administration tells them to do and to teach towards the test, and their kids are well prepared for the test, but they're not having a great experience in the class, they will not be seen as great teachers. I think administrators still really value great teachers, even though they say that it's all about the test. Now, having said that, in my first 36 years, I made up every single test that I gave. And that's fantastic because that means a test reflects what I teach, and it reflects the vocabulary in which I taught that information. In the last 2 years, I've had to give tests that I cannot make my own tests anymore. I have to give tests that some other teacher made, and it's usually somebody, I don't know who makes them, but I know they're not a good teacher because the test is not quality. And so it ends up, my kids, I have to get my kids ready for the test. And so that means that in between our very important labs that we do, I am teaching towards somebody else's test. I'm reciting from somebody else's script. I've always said that my best teachers were artists. They were creative. They figured out what they need to do in class, and then they went their own way with it. And now education is becoming a paint by numbers situation. And when an artist has to paint by numbers, they look to retire. And that's what I'm doing after 38 years. And that's the main reason why I'm getting out is that I don't want to paint by numbers. I really think that within the next 5 years, my district will have district approved PowerPoints that you would do on Tuesday, January 15th. Another one you do on Wednesday, January 16th. And, to keep everybody on the same page and make sure that every kid is getting the same experience. But that's not really what we're after. And that's what's so great going back to sports is the sports is still the wild, wild west. I can train my sprinters however I want to. And somebody else can train their sprinters the way they want to. And another thing is at least in sports, we kind of test what matters. We measure what matters. And I think you mentioned in your question, so how can you assess if the kids are learning? And after 38 years, I really don't believe you can assess if kids are learning or not. You sure can't assess by how well did you memorize the facts that I gave you this week. That is not an assessment. And 99% of all assessments are multiple choice. Now, if a kid tells me, if I'm an English teacher and a kid tells me about 2 books he's read this month on his own, hey, we got something done. If a kid tells me in chemistry class that they're going to take AP chemistry next year and they're thinking about going into chemical engineering, hey, I'm doing something right then. So there are ways, I think, that you can tell that you're getting the job done, but it's not a multiple choice test.
Do you feel like the process of preparing students for these standardized tests warrants so much additional attention that it actually detracts from the things that it is that you deem important, or do you feel like there's enough time to kind of do both?
Well, I think there's always time to do both, but if you're spending half of your time teaching to somebody's fact sheet, somebody else's curriculum, then you're wasting so much of that time. One of the problems we have in all schools right now, high schools especially, is that kids are constantly cheating. They will cheat we're not talking like the kids that are in trouble all the time. We're talking the best kids will cheat. They will steal a test. They'll put it online. They'll type their answers into their graphing calculators and then sell it or just give it away. And so test security has become it is kind of like blocks out the sun. And I've heard so many teachers saying these damn kids these days, they're just a bunch of cheaters. They don't value. And I want to say, no, they don't value your stupid tests. They do not see meaning and significance in memorizing the answers to a test that they don't believe in. I just feel strongly that if it was meaningful and significant, we wouldn't have the cheating problem that we have now.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I certainly believe in personal responsibility, but it's also, the kids are cheating on the test because their parents and the teachers and the administrators are constantly telling them how important the test is, and it's like this is their whole sense of self-worth is contingent upon how they do on these tests. And going to college, which they've made if you don't go to the right college, then it's a death sentence and you can't live a productive life. So I think there's macro level issues that contribute to this that maybe teachers aren't addressing because it's convenient to just blame it on the kids?
Right. And it's all goes back to that next level thing. We want kids, it seems like that sports has just become like a scholarship factory. There are kids that realize they'll never win a scholarship, and they just enjoy playing the sport. But it seems like every good player, that's all they think about is the next level, the recruiting process, all those things. The same things for students. They see high school as a set of hoops to jump through to get to college, and college a set of hoops to jump through to get a high-paying job that's not too hard. And that's not really teaching kids the way it could be.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about essentialism, and I originally was turned on to your work through some of your track and field blogs, where you talk about how your practices last on average 40 minutes. You don't practice any more than 4 times a week. You've got mandatory rest days, which in track and field is heresy. So even as a sprint coach, I mean, conceivably your athletes are training less, duration in an entire week than some teams are in a single practice, and you're still getting really good results. And then if you take it to the academic side, it's sort of similar. Where as a society, we value this grind mentality, and you can never work too hard. And I interview applicants to my undergraduate alma mater, and they try to impress me by telling me all the activities they're doing, and I'm like, man, I wish, do you guys have a life? I mean, it's like they're going to class from 7 in the morning till 3 or 4 in the afternoon. They're playing sports, they're playing instruments, they're doing volunteer work. So they have these like 14-hour work days, and then they have to go home and do 3 to 4 hours of homework every night, which, I mean, if you had an employer who made you work a 15-hour workday and then said you have to do 4 hours of additional work when you go home, even though you're getting paid, nobody would really do that unless you're getting paid a lot of money. And these kids are being forced to go to school. They're not doing it because they want to. So I think that, like, whether it's in sports or in academics, I think we're pushing kids a little bit too far, and not necessarily even seeing a return on investment. It's not even clear that this driving people into the ground is making people perform better, whether it's academically or athletically. So how do you take that essentialism concept that you've cultivated in track and field and apply it to your chemistry class and possibly even education in general without watering down that educational experience and still getting a good academic result?
Yeah, well, I'm stuck in the system. I teach 5 55-minute classes every day. I have a study hall for 35 minutes, and then I coach track. So, I have to teach, my kids are in my class, 28 of them, every class, sitting in their desk for 55 minutes. So that's how much time we have. So my minimalist priority, my essentialism shows off in the fact that I'm not trying to see how much I can get done. I'm trying to get something done and something done well. It may be only 1 or 2 things. Today, all we did was we did a lab where we found how many kilojoules of heat it took to melt ice. And, I'm hands off. I leave them alone. If somebody says, where are the beakers? I'll say, you need to find the beakers. And when somebody says, I don't know what I'm doing wrong with my calculations, I'll say, collaborate, So I'm very hands off. And basically today, all we wanted to do was a hands-on experience. And then we'll discuss that hands-on experience tomorrow and talk about how we're going to write it up as a report. So every day, I think that my goal is probably to get less done than teachers that I don't think are as good as I am. But we definitely get the 1 or 2 things done during that period that we need to get done. That's really the way I am in track too. Now, the thing about the length of the day and what we're requiring of kids is pretty intense. Kids in my school district, they get on the bus at 6:50 in the morning. sunrise, and I think sunrise today was 7:16 in the morning. So they're getting on a bus at 6:30. They're sitting in my class ready to go at 7:05 with little to no personality at all. If you know teenagers, they're not at their best before 10 o'clock in the morning. But see, we don't care about that because we need to run 3 shifts of buses to make sure our expenses stay low in our district. So our high school starts at 7:05, our middle school starts at 8:05, and our little kids go to school at 9:05. And so we can use the same, smaller fleet of buses to do all those things. But the problem comes with if they go from 7:05 to 2:10, and then they have practice for 2 hours, and then they go home, like you say, with 3 hours of homework. Or like I had a couple of my kids go through football programs, well, all 3 of my boys go through football programs that they would sometimes get home at 6:15 or 6:30. And you talk about seeing how much a football coach could get done. They try to do it all every day. And I'll never forget seeing my boys actually come home, not say anything to his parents, and literally go upstairs and go to sleep for 3 or 4 hours, and then try to wake up at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night to do 3 hours of homework. That is no life. And I read the other day that the average high school kid works more hours than their parents, and I believe that. And what's really sad is I think the parents want that. I mean, I hate to say it, but
Right.
I think parents, the best thing about high school is the best teenage daycare ever invented. It is, and I say this to my kids all the time. We are like a medium security prison. Not a single kid can leave school during the school day. Period. They cannot leave the building. Our building has policemen, has the whole Columbine thing. We have cameras everywhere but the bathrooms, and I'm not so sure the bathrooms don't have them either. So I mean, we're on a lockdown daycare center type of situation. And the best thing, I mean, to think that we're actually teaching kids all these things, and we're keeping teenagers safe from 7 in the morning until, God knows, 6 o'clock at night. That's pretty good. And then the kids go home tired, and they're not getting in any trouble. So I don't see many people talking like me, about maybe shortening the school day or shortening classes. I think everybody seems kind of happy with the way schools are.
Yeah. So, I mean, you effectively have almost 5 hours a week with these students in chemistry class, and you seem to be suggesting that that's enough time to meet your learning objectives and prepare them for the standardized test. So what is, as a teacher, your homework policy?
Usually we have some type of work that ends my class day. I think it's if you've ever stood in front of a classroom and taught for 55 straight minutes and then did it for 4 more times during the day, if you did that every day as a teacher, you wouldn't teach very long. You would get your administrative degree and double your money and never have to do that ever again. And so what I believe teachers need to do is to go in every day wanting to do more than one thing. Like I may go in like today. My first 15 minutes was introducing the lab, telling them exactly how to do it, not giving them a 4-page handout with questions on the back like they used to give me. I hated labs when I was a student. So we go over everything that we have to do for the lab, and then they go do the lab, and then they're doing calculations in their last 5 minutes. On another day, I'll teach for 30 minutes, and then we'll practice what I teach. And I still call that doing it. We are not, like doing word searches and stuff. We're doing problems based on thermodynamics or something like that. And then the next day we'll come in, answer questions, and then have a quiz. So we're doing like maybe 2 things, maybe 3 things in every class, but the time that we have is easily enough. I mean, if you look at the fact that the average student is sitting in a desk at my high school for 25 hours a week, compare that to a full load of a college student. What's that, 15 semester hours?
It's way more, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost double. And when kids say, gee, I don't know if I can go to college for 6 years, are you kidding me? You're only in class like 12, 15 hours a week. And they're like, really? I go, yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like half of what's expected out of you in high school. But once again, we're not, the number one thing for high schools is to keep kids safe and busy and prepare them for the next level. I mean, those are the three things. And if those are your priorities, then you're probably not going to do very well on the love of reading, the love of writing, curiosity, questioning authority, developing a rebellious spirit, developing a respect for intelligence and debate. You're probably not going to do real well on those things if basically you're just trying to keep kids incarcerated and get them to the next level.
Right. Going back to sports a little bit, because there are so many parallels between what you're doing as a coach and as a teacher. Can you talk about what the various sports that you've coached throughout your career, and then the principles that underlie your coaching in any activity?
I coached 3 sports for most of my 38 years. All I wanted to do is be a basketball coach. My dad was a basketball coach for 47 years. 44 of those years he was a head coach, and he coached at high school and college level. And that was his life. And so I just loved getting up every day and seeing how excited he was for that day, that practice, the next game, the next season. He was excited all the time. There was never like, oh, it's Sunday night, I got to go to school tomorrow. No, he was excited to go to school. That was his life. And so I wanted the same life because I didn't know any other adults that felt that way about their job. And so I was a basketball coach. I was the youngest head basketball coach in the state of Illinois in 1982. I was 23 years old and a head coach. And then I got fired 8 years later. It was a bullshit firing, but that doesn't matter. That happens all the time. But I got hired as the head track coach the month before that happened. And so I had little kids and no money. And so I couldn't exactly like, hey, we're going to go to some other town so daddy can be the basketball coach there. So I just had to rewire myself into a track coach. And so I became a track coach, and then football has been a common thread through most of my career. I got out of it 2 years ago, but I became a pretty good football coach too, and coaching a couple as an assistant in a couple state championship games, and had a great time coaching lower levels. We won a lot of games and all that kind of stuff. So I've been throughout my entire career. I've been a multi-sport coach, and I think that's what led me to believe that. Well, not to believe, it led me to know that playing multiple sports is a really great thing for kids because sports is a part of the educational process. I don't know of any classroom that can teach as much as the football classroom can teach, or the basketball classroom, or the track classroom. My coaches, when I played, were the strongest personalities of any men I ever knew. And I think that happens a lot in today's world too. Just very smart, driven, strong personalities, and many of them teach as well. And I think that's something that when I look back at my career, I've always been very proud of the fact that I taught science and coached.
Okay, then what are the principles that sort of unite the way that you would coach any sport? I've heard you talk about how, like, for example, you place a huge emphasis on skill before anything else, which sounds kind of obvious, but it's generally not done. So can you talk more about just, foundational things, regardless of sport, maybe the role that, or the emphasis you place on skill?
Yeah, it's huge. And, when I was growing up as a basketball coach, besides just learning from my dad, I spent a lot of time with Bobby Knight before he turned into a monster. And Knight was such a technician and such a wonderful, magical teacher of skills. And he used to say that you got to teach kids to play before you teach them plays. And I think that's resonated with me throughout my career, is that you don't throw kids out on the floor and say, we're going to play 5-on-5. You got to shoot the ball. And if you don't learn to shoot the ball, then you'll never be any good. And I was just talking to my daughter-in-law, who my son's a very good coach, and he married a coach, and she coaches seventh grade basketball, and the head girls basketball coach at that school wants her to run this offense and that defense and run these out of bounds plays and blah 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 blah. And she says, I really don't have time to do things like teaching passing and shooting. And I'm about ready to like have a fit or something. I'm like, oh, but you got to. And then I remember back watching practices of middle school teams and fifth grade teams and watch them work on out of bounds plays for 30 minutes. And they throw it in and they shoot an air ball. I thought, man, you've got to learn how to shoot. And, then the same thing happens in football, where coaches spend 90% of their time scheming to, after watching 12 hours of film on Sunday, scheming to beat a team on a Friday night. And then, they may have a real good scheme. They may have, the right defense and 4 new plays that they think are going to work. And then the quarterback fumbles 2 snaps because they didn't work on the important things. The important things in football are blocking and tackling. The quarterback never fumbling a snap, offensive lineman never holding. So everything that I do kind of boils down to what is the true minimum? What's the true minimum? When you start looking at things like, okay, I could do 12 things, but I'm only going to do 3. Well, immediately you pick the 3 most important things. Well, that's really important. And then you say, I'm really going to get good at those 3 most important things. And that goes right to the heart of everything I do in chemistry, everything I do in track. I mean, if I ever was crazy enough to take a football team again, be a head football coach or something, that's the way I coach football. That's the way I coach basketball. So it really boils down to the skills of the game before the strategy of the game, or the skills of a chemistry student before the abstractions of chemistry.
Yeah, you talked a lot about watching film, and that's such a badge of honor among coaches. You hear it a lot in the NFL, where it's like these coaches are sleeping in the office. And how much of that do you think is really necessary versus how much do you think is just, it's a part of our culture where kind of to make ourselves feel better, we think that if we just spend more hours at the office that we're going to perform better? Because obviously, I'm not saying scheme isn't important, but execution is also important. And I feel like in coaching now, we value scheme and some of this tactical stuff over skill development, when, like you said, a lot of things come down to execution and not necessarily scheme. So what do you think kind of a reasonable stance is on watching film versus just neuroticism and trying to outwork everybody?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that coaches in particular, and probably America, is pretty much of the same religion, and that is hard work. That we were brought up thinking that hard work would accomplish everything. That if you failed, it was because you were weak and you needed to work harder. I talked to people who work for professional teams. One in particular bought the catapult system, which has the GPS that tests how fast players go and how much they move during practice. And I said, so what are you doing with the warehouse full of data? And they go, well, it's sitting in the warehouse. Because when it comes down to it, if we lose on Sunday, this is a professional, this is an NFL football team. If we lose on Sunday, they don't care that everybody's running 14 miles an hour and they should be running 17 to 20 miles an hour. All they care about is that we're going to work twice as hard. We're going to double down. I love what the Bears coach, he's my favorite coach in the NFL, Nagy. He said that winning or losing streaks in the NFL are the result of unintended overloading. Unintended overloading, which means that, hey, we lost, so by God, we're going to work harder. If we're not going to win, at least we're going to work harder than everybody else. And I said before, often, that football coaches would rather lose than to get outworked. If I could show them, and I could, a way to spend half as much time and be better with half as much time, most of them would still choose to go that longer time. And that's because they belong to the religion of hard work. And it's just so hard to get out of that stuff because everybody rewards it. And the other thing about, we were talking about film and strategy and things, coaches are constantly wanting to be the reason why their team wins.
Yeah.
This is really a weird statement, but I watched a friend of mine coaching a state championship baseball game one time, one out, guy on third, and then they tried a suicide squeeze. And I guarantee they tried a suicide squeeze so that if that guy scored, well, who called that suicide squeeze? The coach. It was a way for the coach to win the game, where I am more of like, let the players win the game. And as luck would have it, the guy missed the ball and the guy was out at the plate. And on the next pitch, he hit a ball in the gap and the guy from second scored. So they ended up winning the state championship anyway. But I'll never forget that because even though he's a friend of mine, I thought, damn, I think he wanted to win the game. And it's the same thing. Instead of going, like week 2 with the same offense you ran in week 1 as a football coach, they're wanting 5 new plays because they don't want to trust their kids. They want to be the reason why they won the game because coaches are damn competitive. And I'm kind of the other way around. A lot of people probably, they don't, not to my face, but they probably make fun of me at track meets because I'm just a photographer at track meets. I take pictures. I take damn good pictures, and I put them on Twitter and put them on my website, and it makes the track meet look. In hindsight, it makes the track meet look twice as good as it really was. Nobody could tell how windy it was by the pictures. Nobody can tell, Anyway, I take pictures, and so people say, "Well, gee, you're a coach. You need to be coaching." Well, I know that my kids, if you try to cue kids that are running 11 meters a second, you will actually slow them down. If you have kids thinking about what they're doing instead of doing things instinctually, you will slow them down. Now, it would probably look better if I was yelling stuff at them and, just constantly working during the track meet and, acting like I knew what I was doing. But I don't care. I don't care how I look. I want my kids to perform, and I want to promote what they do through my pictures and my writing and all that. So yeah, I just think the coaches get all tied up in wanting to be the man.
Yeah, that's a really good point because especially in a track meet with a sprinter where you're running 100 to 200 meters in a straight line or around a curve, I mean, you can make the argument that if you have to coach on race day, it's a failure of your preparation. Because what's there really to talk about? I mean, if you've worked on your block starts and guys are technically sound and they know what they should be doing and they've run full speed in practice, which your team does all the time, like I don't get what there really is to do on race day besides maybe take pictures. And just what you also said made me think of even in football, right? Like where you said coaches want to be the reason why teams win. I always think when I watch quarterbacks, like wouldn't the ideal scenario from a play calling standpoint be to train or develop the quarterback to the point that regardless of whether you're in a hurry up or even just a regular paced offense, that the quarterback could call the plays at the line of scrimmage because that quarterback has the most situational awareness and the best view of the defense versus like the genius play caller from like the luxury box or even on the field. Like in the abstract, like what would be wrong with even having the quarterback call the plays?
Well, I love that idea, and I did that with my freshman sophomore teams quite a bit. Whenever we were hurry up, I basically schooled my quarterback on the limited offense that we would do in hurry up. And we would have literally one pass play, and it was hitch, which means all four guys hitch. But he had the ability to tag any guy to have him go vertical. And I taught him how to read the defense and make the decision. I didn't have to yell out the tag myself. I think when you give ownership to kids, you will be just shocked at how their performance improves because they feel like it's, that they own it, that they're not like working for the master. They're not working for this guy that, this tyrant, this coach that basically thinks he's playing a chess game all the time. And I hope that my kids feel like they own their own performance, that it's not me. I'll tell them sometimes that I'm along for the ride, and it's a good ride. I get to cheer for them like they're all my own kid, but basically it's their performance. And I just love, like what you said, that you could give kids so much more ownership. And the way I coach football and the way I really believe it should be is that you come up with, your handful of running plays and your handful of passing plays, and you stick with it. You may throw in a little something fun once in a while when you get bored with running those plays, and then you trust your athletes and you make sure you don't fumble and no holding calls, and you block and tackle real well. And sometimes you lose when you play against a team that's better than you. But this whole idea that somehow, you're in a chess game or something, that makes me sick.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the game isn't more sophisticated at the collegiate level and the professional level than high school, but if you can trust high school kids to take on a little bit more autonomy in a game, like presumably a professional athlete could do that if you created the right environment. So going back to the specialization thing, because thankfully a lot of coaches and people in the athletic world are beginning to recognize the downside to early specialization in sports. But could you make a case that the way children are taught in school is also overly specialized? If you look at the classroom structure, we have separate courses for math and science and writing and history and social studies and the arts. Like, do you think the fragmented way that we develop these curriculums hinders or facilitates learning at the high school level, at least?
I think, the specialization thing, I want to mention with the athletic thing, I think that overall, education-based sports, which is the only sports I like. I don't like non-education-based sports. And overall, with the exception of some knucklehead basketball coaches, football coaches, and volleyball coaches, the specialization is not something that is that people really push for a whole lot in the educational scene. The real problem has come with entrepreneurs, people that are making $80,000 a year doing 7-on-7 camps and tournaments, personal trainers that tell their clients that if they're doing the weight work at their high school, that they're missing out, that their football coaches don't know what they're talking about, and that you need to lift in my place and pay $150 a month. The specialty quarterback gurus out there that badmouth every high school football team and say, if you're going to make it to the next level, you need to pay me $1,000 a month and I'll make you a great quarterback. The soccer academies. Actually, I had a kid that I was really excited about going around my track team 4 years ago, and his soccer academy told me he could not run track, and I said, well, but he doesn't own you or anything, right? If you wanted to run track, you could. And he goes, no, I signed a contract with him when I was 9, and I said, you signed? Well, my parents and I signed a contract that we would. So, we're literally talking about some really messed up stuff. And it's all money in the, it's all due to money in the sports world. But educationally, I don't really see that high school suffers from too much specialization. I do think we suffer from not giving kids choice. Like at my school, basically, as a sophomore, you can take chemistry or you can take honors chemistry. You can take Spanish, you can take French, or you can take German. You can take honors English or regular English. And so basically they are just pigeonholed into a certain rigid curriculum that was much different than what I went through. I loved high school because it seemed kind of like college, where I really got to pick, what type of history I took. I got to pick my science classes. It's just not that way anymore. Now in college, it's way too rigid and way too specialized, because they really run this game of yeah, you got to pick what you're going to be for the rest of your life, and we're going to help you be that person. And what they're not telling you is that the average person changes their job 3, 4, 5 times during their career. So they would probably be better off being in a liberal arts education like I went through in college, where you learned how to read and write and think and all those things, instead of a specialized career type college situation.
Got it. So you're obviously for some choice and autonomy with some of these educational pursuits. So how do you, whether it's in track and field or in the classroom, what strategies do you employ to empower students to take initiative and become leaders and autonomous learners versus just these passive sponges that absorb facts and discard them after a test?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know if I don't think we do a very good job with it. Basically, we tell kids to sit down and shut up, and keep your hands to yourself, and no cell phones, and you got to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. When you go, you got to sign out, and sign back in, and so we're really teaching them to be domesticated. I used to say that public schools did a great job of teaching kids how to survive in society, and now I'm kind of more like domesticated animals we teach them. And so the only thing I would like to think that strong-willed teachers that model curiosity and a rebellious spirit, and not afraid to answer a question truthfully to kids, to challenge kids. About 90% of every high school kid is the political party of their parents. They're the religion of their parents. They're closed-minded. And so, I just hope that adults out there, and I don't think many teachers are like this, but are strong enough to at least model the type of individuality and rebellious spirit that you really need to have to survive in this world.
Yeah, and I think that kids in school and kids in general are taught to see adults as infallible, when adults are often just as clueless, if not more so, than kids. But we don't want them to know that secret, right? So,
no. Yeah, and kids. I always tell parents. I said, parents will say, all these kids these days, they have so many things going on with drugs, and I'm like, oh my God, did you not live through the 70s?
Right.
I mean, are you kidding me? I smelled weed every single day in high school, in my high school. And I have not smelled weed one time in my 12 years, 13 years at Plainfield North High School. Not one single time have I smelled it in the school. So for all the people who think that these kids are awful and all that stuff, they are smart, and they really, really work hard at what they like. They're kind of rebellious about things they don't like, and they'll cheat if they don't like to do something. But man, you give them a cell phone, and they'll master that cell phone. Some of them will master very complex video games. Kids are just relentless in sports they like, So I think the key is to, nurture that love of things, instead of, just this top-down forcing curriculum on kids.
Well, I'm really glad you brought up kids these days? Because the next thing I wanted to ask you about was this whole millennial craze. Like when I see these articles on the internet about millennials, my instinct is that it's just people who are trying to get website hits. Like I don't think that there's like this new species of human being or of child in the last 10 years. To me, people are people, and yes, technology has maybe changed certain things, but fundamentally, like the core issues are the same. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not an educator, but you've been teaching for 4 decades. So if you had to drastically alter your methodology to accommodate these millennials?
No. I've been around 50. Basically, I've taught sophomores in high school for 38 years. And smart 15-year-olds are the coolest kids in the world. I mean, they are absolutely spectacular, and they are excited, and they're tough, and they're far more mature than they probably act around the house. No, I'm really, really impressed with them. I think sometimes parents think it must be a free-for-all in public schools, and it's not. One of the things, a funny story, one of the things, they're scared to death to let kids have cell phones in school. And, I'm like, it's a computer. I mean, it is the greatest thing in the world to have out inside your desk. And, adults will say, yeah, they'll be sharing, naked pictures of each other. I said that in class one time. And the student said, what? They think we're going to be sharing naked pictures of each other during school? So obviously that's funny, because they would never do it during school, but maybe
after hours, maybe. Yeah.
After hours, that's the way I.
They're smart, yeah.
I mean, no, they're really mature at school. But I say smart teenagers, but I taught lower levels for 16 of my 38 years, and I had a blast with them too. The tough thing with them is that they come into your class hating school. Like literally hating school. It's like the worst part of their day. It lasts forever. I mean, they literally hate it. And so what I found was that if you just ran a pretty good class, they really responded. And, if you put, like their needs above what you were told to teach them, that they really responded with that as well. So no, I've talked pretty negative, I guess, about schools and everything. But the one thing I would really talk positive about is kids. I mean, they are absolutely spectacular. And that's, I mean, I'm not trying to be cheesy or anything, but, that's really what I'll miss when I retire is being around, 150 smart 15-year-olds every day.
Yeah. I mean, you've, like you said, been teaching for 38 years. You're about to retire. And I just want to say, oftentimes we associate jobs like the military or the fire department or law enforcement with service, but I think that teachers and coaches are some of the ultimate public servants. So I just thank you for everything you've done in your career, even though you haven't influenced me directly. I mean, I think if you asked most people who some of their greatest influences were outside of their parents when they were kids, they would say they could rattle off a couple of teachers and a couple of coaches. So what's next for you? I mean, it's been 4 decades and you've been teaching and coaching. You've got, a couple of decades left to enjoy your life. So what's on tap?
Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of fun. I'm going to coach, at least one more year. I told, my star sprinter is the number 1 sprinter in the nation right now, Marcellus Moore. I told his father that I would continue coaching for Marcellus' senior year.
That's really cool.
And so I'll do that. And I can't really imagine not coaching because, I mean, like I ordered T-shirts today for my track team. And I love ordering T-shirts. And I love filling out a meet lineup. And I love taking 2 hours, maybe 3 hours these days, developing my pictures and doing my meet write-up after every meet. Basically making a scrapbook that my kids can always look back and see all fantastic things happen in the meet, and I don't write about the bad things. So it all, in hindsight, it always looks pretty good. The times I come home excited, the times I'm anxious, nervous, and then all the friends I have. I mean, like 98% of my friends are coaches, like track coaches. So I can't really imagine getting away from it, but I've totally fallen in love with writing. I could pursue that. I've been doing a lot of podcasts lately, and I enjoy that. I'm a presenter at clinics, and it's absolutely just the greatest experience in the world when you get to stand up in front of adults that want to be there and they want to learn, and they're like writing down stuff that you say. And plus I have stuff that I really want to say. I'm kind of a evangelist preacher when I talk, because I'm talking, in ways that make it better for kids. And so I really believe in it. It's more than just running fast. It's making a fantastic experience for kids. So I love all those things. And, but then again, I kind of like the idea of blowing it all up and going out and having a big garden and, some dogs running in the yard too. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got 3 grandkids, and that ages, 2, 1, and a couple weeks. So I'm not going to go far. And my wife and I have always talked about moving to the city and giving up our cars and having a coffee place across the street and a bar down the corner, and doing the whole Chicago thing. And 2 of my kids live downtown. So I just don't know what I'll be doing, but I'll be doing something.
Well, that's the cool part. You don't need to know, and you have lots of options.
Yeah.
So where can people learn more about, what you do and encounter some of the things that you've written? What resources would you point them to?
Obviously you can Google my name and there's lots of stuff, that you can get just that way. But my main vehicle for being out there and social media or whatever is Twitter. And on Twitter, I'm at PN Track. That's my Plainfield North Track, PN Track. And up at the top of my Twitter handle or whatever, there's a link that accesses probably 160 or 170 of my articles. I think I've written like 200 of them. So you can read my stuff, read my propaganda through that, and I'd say that's the place to go. I co-own the Track Football Consortium, which is a really cool event. The only thing like it, where we get a really interesting mix of football coaches, track coaches, and strength and conditioning coaches, and bring in some really good people. We brought in Carl Lewis. We brought in Stu McMillan. We brought in Gabe Sanders this year from Stanford, Ron Grigg from Jacksonville University, Steve Jones from a high school coach from Wisconsin that won 70 consecutive games. Just really an all-star group of speakers and presenters that really talk out of the box, and they're all kind of rebel talents and stuff. And so we do that in June and December of every year, and that's a really cool thing. So yeah, that's how you get a hold of me, and I answer all emails too. My email address is out there for everybody.
All right. Well, you've been super generous with your time, and excited to see what the future has in store for you. But you still got a lot of work to do this track season, so you can't quite think about retirement yet. But thanks again for everything, and look forward to crossing paths soon.
Well, Doug, this has been a very unique experience, getting to talk about schools and education and stuff. And thank you very much for having me.
Thanks a lot. Good night. This podcast is brought to you by Resilient Performance Systems. If you enjoy the material here, please check out our website at www.resilientperformance.com and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on future podcast episodes, articles, and upcoming content, including training templates and live and online courses. The sign-up link for the newsletter is in the show notes. Podcast listeners will receive a discount on all paid content by entering the coupon code PODCAST. That's PODCAST in all capital letters. Additionally, please consider writing an iTunes review if you find these podcast conversations informative. They help us continue to attract high-quality guests.